"Anthony, you can't hide from what you owe me." The voice rasped from the pink creature perched on his nightstand, its black button eyes reflecting the red digits of his alarm clock. The doll's mouth moved with deliberate precision, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth that hadn't existed when he'd bought it for his daughter 3 months ago. Anthony's bedroom door slammed shut behind him with such force that the picture frames rattled against the walls, though no wind stirred the curtains. The Labubu's head rotated 180 degrees, maintaining eye contact as Anthony stumbled backward against his dresser. Its stubby arms began to elongate, stretching like taffy toward him, while its cheerful pink exterior darkened to the color of dried blood. The temperature in the room plummeted so quickly that his breath became visible, and frost began forming on the windows, despite the August heat outside. "You took something that wasn't yours," the creature continued, its voice multiplying into a chorus that seemed to emerge from every corner of the room. The walls themselves appeared to pulse with a heartbeat that matched Anthony's racing pulse, and the hardwood floor beneath his feet started to buckle and warp, as if something massive were pushing up from below. Every electronic device in the house began to shriek in unison. Smoke detectors, his phone, the television downstairs, creating a cacophony that drilled into his skull. Anthony had purchased the collectible toy from a street vendor in Chinatown 6 weeks after losing his job at the accounting firm, desperate to bring his 8-year-old daughter Emma something special before his weekend visitation ended. The custody payments were behind, the rent was overdue, and his ex-wife had been making threats about supervised visits only. But Emma loved the Labubu dolls she saw other kids carrying, and $40 seemed like a small price to pay for her smile, even if it meant skipping meals for the rest of the week. The vendor had been ancient, weathered hands counting Anthony's crumpled bills twice before sliding the pink creature across his makeshift table. "This one very special," the old man had whispered, his English broken but urgent. "Bring great fortune to family, but must respect, must honor agreement." Anthony had nodded absently, focused only on Emma's anticipated reaction, not bothering to ask what agreement the man meant. Now the doll spoke with intimate knowledge of his failures. 23 years old when you first stole from the register at Murphy's grocery," it hissed, advancing across the nightstand on legs that had grown 3 times their original length. 16 when you cheated on the SATs, 31 when you cooked the books for Morrison Industries. Each revelation hit like a physical blow, secrets he'd never told another living soul spilling from the creature's distorted mouth. The photographs on his dresser began to bleed, not metaphorically, but actual crimson, liquid seeping from the frames and pooling on the wood surface. His reflection in the mirror showed not his own face, but the disappointed expressions of everyone he'd ever wronged. His ex-wife discovering hidden credit card debt, his former boss realizing the embezzled funds, his daughter asking why daddy couldn't buy her the things other kids had. Anthony's phone buzzed with incoming text messages, though the screen remained black and unresponsive when he tried to check them. The Labubu giggled, a sound like glass breaking in reverse. "Your sister knows," it said. "Sweet Patricia always suspected you were different. Check your messages, Anthony. See what she sent you 20 minutes ago." The device suddenly blazed to life, displaying a conversation thread he'd never seen before. Patricia's contact photo showed her face, but her eyes were completely black and her mouth was stretched into an impossible grin. The messages read, "I dreamed about you last night. You were small again, hiding money in your sock drawer. Mom's jewelry box was open. Why didn't you tell me about the inheritance you never shared?" Anthony's hands shook as he scrolled upward, finding months of messages he'd never received, all from family members describing dreams where they witnessed his crimes. His brother David, writing about visions of forged signatures. His mother Mary, recounting nightmares where Anthony sold her engagement ring while she lay dying in the hospital. Messages from his daughter Emma, written in a child's simple language. "Daddy, in my dream, you were crying because you took something that wasn't yours, and now the pink monster wants it back." The Labubu had grown to the size of a house cat, its vinyl flesh rippling like liquid as it approached the edge of the nightstand. "The vendor warned you about respect," it said, and Anthony suddenly remembered the old man's words with crystal clarity. The purchase hadn't been a simple transaction. It had been a binding contract. The doll would bring his family fortune, but only if he honored his debts and lived honestly. Instead, Anthony had stolen it. "I paid for it," he whispered. But even as the words left his mouth, he remembered the truth. The vendor had quoted $60. Anthony had only given him $40, claiming it was all he had while keeping a $20 hidden in his shoe. The old man's disappointed nod now took on sinister significance. The creature's laughter filled the room as it leaped from the nightstand to Anthony's chest, its weight far heavier than any toy should be. Its claws, now fully extended, pierced through his shirt and into his skin. Payment was never about money, it explained, its voice coming from inside his own head now. Payment was about choice. Choose honesty, receive blessing. Choose deception, receive consequence. Anthony's bedroom began to shift and blur around the edges, walls stretching impossibly tall while the ceiling pressed down toward his head. The hardwood floor became quicksand, and he found himself sinking slowly as the Labubu maintained its perch on his chest. His daughter's face appeared in the grain of the wood beneath him, her eyes wide with terror as she reached up through the surface, unable to break through. "She's trapped in the space between," the creature explained conversationally. "Every lie you tell, every theft you commit pushes her deeper. Soon she'll disappear entirely, and no one will remember she existed except you." Emma's mouth moved soundlessly, forming the word "daddy" over and over as she sank further into the wooden depths. The realization hit Anthony like ice water. This wasn't about punishment, it was about collection. The doll hadn't come to torture him for his past crimes. It had come to claim what he'd taken, his daughter's future. Every dishonest act had been stealing from her inheritance of trust, safety, and love. The creature fed on deception, growing stronger with each lie, and Anthony had been feeding it for decades without realizing it. With tremendous effort, he pushed the growing creature off his chest and stumbled toward his desk, where he kept his laptop. The Labubu shrieked in protest, its form beginning to smoke and shimmer as Anthony's fingers flew across the keyboard. He accessed his bank account, his credit cards, every financial platform he could remember. The room shook violently as he began transferring money, not to pay bills or cover debts, but to Emma's college fund, to charities, to everyone he'd ever shortchanged. Returning what was never yours won't save her, The creature snarled, but its voice had weakened noticeably. The photographs stopped bleeding, and Emma's face in the floor grew clearer, more substantial. Anthony continued typing, his accounting skills serving him now in ways they never had before. He documented every fraudulent transaction, every hidden debt, every lie that had built his adult life. With each honest entry, the room stabilized a little more. The creature's pink exterior began to crack like old paint, revealing something ancient and hungry underneath. I confessed to embezzling $43,000 from Morrison Industries, he said aloud as he typed. The Labubu stumbled, its elongated limbs shortening. I confessed to stealing my mother's jewelry and selling it for gambling money. The creature's teeth retracted. I confessed to cheating Emma out of the father she deserved because I was too cowardly to face my failures. With each confession, Emma's form grew more solid beneath the floor until she was able to push her hands through the surface. Anthony reached down and pulled her up, his daughter's solid weight in his arms, the most real thing he'd felt in months. She looked exactly as she had the day he'd given her the Labubu, complete with the gap-toothed smile that made his heart ache. "Daddy, you're telling the truth now," she said, her voice carrying impossible wisdom. "I can hear it in your voice. It sounds different when you tell the truth." The creature made one final desperate lunge toward them, but Anthony was ready. He grabbed the original Labubu doll from where it sat on his dresser, the small, innocent version that Emma had treasured, and held it out like a shield. "This belongs to her," he said firmly. "I paid the full price, and I choose to honor the agreement. Honesty for blessing, truth for protection." The massive, distorted creature collided with the small doll and began to compress, its stolen power flowing back into the original form. The room returned to normal proportions. The bleeding photographs became simple memories again, and the oppressive weight in the air lifted like morning fog. Emma kissed his cheek and began to fade, but a smile remained warm. "I have to go back now, but you can visit me whenever you want. Just remember to tell the truth." She vanished like morning light, leaving only the scent of her strawberry shampoo. Anthony found himself alone with the original Labubu doll, which sat peacefully on his dresser, button eyes reflecting nothing more sinister than the morning sun streaming through his windows. His phone showed 17 missed calls from his ex-wife, 3 from his lawyer, and 42 from various creditors. But for the first time in years, he felt ready to answer them all. The vendor's business card, which he'd kept in his wallet, had changed overnight. Where once it had shown a simple address in Chinatown, it now bore a message in elegant script. Honesty honored, debt forgiven, family fortune restored through truth. 3 months later, Anthony sat in a courtroom reading a prepared statement that detailed every financial crime he'd committed over the past 15 years. His ex-wife held Emma's hand in the gallery, both of them listening as he accepted responsibility for the chaos his deceptions had caused. The judge sentenced him to restitution and community service rather than prison time, impressed by his comprehensive confession and willingness to make amends. Emma visited him every weekend now, and they spent the time together building models and playing board games and telling each other stories that were always completely true. The Labubu doll sat on the shelf in her room, a reminder of the price of deception and the power of choosing differently. Sometimes, late at night, Anthony thought he heard whispers from the doll, but they no longer spoke his name with menace. Instead, they sounded like Emma's voice, calling him home. But the peace lasted only 6 months. Emma's screams tore through the apartment at 3:17 a.m., the same ungodly hour when the Labubu had first spoken Anthony's name. He sprinted to her room to find her sitting upright in bed, staring at the empty shelf where her doll usually sat. The Labubu was gone. "Daddy, it took someone else," she whispered, pointing toward her bedroom window. "It walked across the fire escape to the building next door. Mrs. Rodriguez's grandson got one just like it yesterday." Anthony pressed his face to the glass and peered into the adjacent apartment. Through the thin curtains, he could see 8-year-old Miguel Rodriguez thrashing in his bed, his mouth open in a silent scream, while a familiar pink figure sat on his chest. The boy's grandmother stood in the doorway, hands pressed to her temples, tears streaming down her weathered face. "The debt transfers," Emma said with that impossible wisdom she'd gained. "When you tell the truth, it has to find someone else who's lying. Miguel's been stealing lunch money from other kids at school." Anthony's blood turned to ice. He'd broken his own curse by embracing honesty, but in doing so, he'd simply passed the entity on to another child. The Labubu wasn't destroyed. It was a parasite that moved from host to host, feeding on deception wherever it could find it. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "The vendor was my grandfather. He died yesterday. Now you understand the true curse. You can save yourself, but the hunger never ends. Choose wisely, Anthony Chen." The message was signed with a name that made his stomach clench. Lucy Chen, Chinatown Antiquities. Anthony realized with growing horror that the vendor hadn't been random. Chen was his mother's maiden name, and he'd never told the old man his family history. The creature had been following his bloodline for generations, passed down through a family business that trafficked in supernatural debt collection. "Daddy, you have to help Miguel," Emma said, climbing out of bed. "The doll told me something before it left. It said, if you don't stop it from feeding on 3 more children, it gets strong enough to take me back permanently." Through the window, Anthony watched Miguel's body arch impossibly as the Labubu grew larger, feeding on the boy's terror and guilt. Mrs. Rodriguez collapsed to her knees, her mouth moving in what looked like desperate prayer. The apartment's lights began to flicker in the familiar pattern that Anthony remembered all too well. "How do I stop it?" he asked Emma. But when he turned around, she was gone. In her place stood the small pink doll, returned to its original size but somehow different. Its button eyes now held flecks of Emma's hazel irises, and its vinyl mouth curved in her gentle smile. "You can't destroy it," Emma's voice emerged from the doll, "but you can contain it. The vendor's granddaughter left something for you in the courtyard. She's been waiting." Anthony raced downstairs to find a young woman standing beneath the fire escape, holding an ornate music box that hummed with the same otherworldly energy he'd felt from the Labubu. Lucy Chen looked exactly like her grandfather, but her eyes held decades of inherited sorrow. "My family has been the keepers for 200 years, she explained. "The entity feeds on lies, but it can be trapped in objects that represent pure truth. This music box plays my great-grandmother's lullaby, the only song she ever sang honestly, even while dying of grief. What do I have to do?" Lucy's smile was grim. Tell the truth about why you really bought the doll, not the story you tell yourself about wanting to make Emma happy. The real reason. Anthony's throat constricted as the buried truth surfaced. I bought it because I wanted her to love me more than she loved her mother. I was competing with a 7-year-old for my daughter's affection, and I thought a $40 toy could buy her loyalty. The music box burst open, its melody cutting through the night air like a blade. Above them, Miguel's screams finally became audible as the Labubu shrieked in response to the pure, honest music. The creature tumbled from the boy's window, its distorted form compressing as it fell toward the courtyard. Anthony caught the entity in his hands just as it resumed its original shape. For a moment, it felt like nothing more than a child's toy. Then Lucy slammed the music box shut, and the Labubu vanished into its velvet interior with a sound like thunder. "The box will hold it for 50 years, Lucy said, locking the mechanism with an antique key. After that, it becomes someone else's burden. That's how the curse works. Each generation must choose between selfish truth and selfless sacrifice." She handed him a business card identical to her grandfather's, but with Anthony's name printed across the bottom. "Your turn to be the keeper. The next person who needs to learn about honesty will find you when they're ready." As Lucy disappeared into the shadows, Anthony looked up to see Miguel sitting peacefully in his window, no longer tormented. Mrs. Rodriguez waved gratefully from the doorway. And in his own apartment, Emma, the real Emma, not the doll, pressed her face to the glass and mouthed the words, "Thank you, Daddy." Anthony pocketed the music box and the business card, understanding that his real punishment was just beginning. He would spend the rest of his life helping others confront their lies, knowing that each person he saved would eventually pass the burden to someone else. Some curses couldn't be broken, only shared.